Hey, Foreclosure Fix family, and welcome to another episode of the Foreclosure Fix podcast. Today's episode is very, very special because it is our Veterans Day episode. And on today's episode, I have my good friend, Jamie Bateman, who is a combat veteran and former Army officer. And so, Jamie, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm pumped to be here, DJ. I'm just hoping to add as much value as possible.
Well, first, I want to say thank you on behalf of the Foreclosure Fix family to all the service members around the world who keep us safe, who risk their lives day in and day out to protect the freedoms we hold dear in this great United States of America. So thank you for your service, Jamie, and just thank you to all the service members around the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to second that sentiment for the veterans out there. A lot of veterans go overlooked, and it's really it's can be a thankless job at times, and we appreciate you.
Well, I know that a lot of veterans face foreclosure. You know, although the VA has that great mortgage where you don't have to put down too much, I've seen numerous veterans, face foreclosure situations. And so I'm excited to have you on today to talk not just about your experiences with homeowners facing foreclosure, but also your experience around mindset and your new book that's entitled From Adversity to Abundance, but also the lessons that you've learned as a former Army officer and what you value now in this season of your life. So maybe speak to that a little bit, Jamie, for our listeners.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned season because I do feel like looking back on my own life, and hopefully there's a lot left. I do kind of see different chapters or different seasons, and it used to be team sports used to be a big part of my life, athletics, and then after college I kind of was searching for something bigger to be a part of, and ended up joining the military. And I think ultimately that thread has continued through the different chapters and seasons of my life is always wanting to be a part of something bigger than myself. And that may sound like, I'm tooting my own horn but I think we all need that. We all need to serve others and serve a bigger, mission and vision. And for me, the military filled that void, at least for a chapter, like you said. And so through those two different chapters, I guess the team sports chapter and the military chapter, just teamwork and selfless service, I guess you could look up the Army tenets, have been critical. So, and a lot of those lessons I've learned along the way absolutely apply to note investing, business, and just life in general. So that's actually how my podcast and book were born. The podcast is also called From Adversity to Abundance. And the book is essentially based on some of the best stories that we've had on my podcast. And a lot of the lessons you can take from the goal of the podcast, the goal of the book is to take lessons learned and learn from other people's stories, and so that we don't all have to go through the same, or we can avoid certain pain and trials and tribulations and learn from other stories and help each other out, because the fact is we're all guaranteed to face adversity. And so to answer your question, a lot of the principles and lessons I've learned through different chapters of my life, including the military chapter, especially the military chapter, still apply today in my many hats that I wear, but I think apply to your listeners as well.
Jamie, as I think about the message of adversity to abundance, I know many people think about the financial sides of foreclosure and the fact that somebody's in a tough financial spot. But a lot of people don't think about the mental side and the mental fortitude it takes to overcome, or what happens, unfortunately, if you do succumb to foreclosure, what it takes to move on to the next level. From your experience with the guests that you've interviewed and just your research around just that topic, kind of what have you seen are the characteristics or the differences with people who are able to get through tough and difficult situations to become abundant on the other side?
Yeah, no, great question. And, we could spend 3 hours. I mean, there's so much to unpack there. Interesting, an interesting realization I've had as I've gone through my own podcast and interviewed many different people with from different walks of life with different stories, is that we all experience adversity. We all have, some version of adversity. The three buckets we tend to end up focusing on my show are financial, health, and relationship. And we want simple things in life. We want to kind of compartment things and label things. So it's easy for me to sit here and say, well, the adversity falls into one of those three buckets. The reality is it's all related, right? So if you're going through financial hardship, facing foreclosure, that's probably going to be putting some strain on your relationships. And that's probably eventually going to help affect your health, right? Whether that's mental health, physical health. So it's all related. And so I think things that, the common threads among the guests that have been able to overcome adversity really are, one, taking ownership of your situation. And so when I say that, I don't necessarily mean to say that everything is your fault. You created this financial hardship and you're 100% to blame as the homeowner facing foreclosure. That's not what I'm saying. But the reality is you are in this position, right? So it does you no good to, succumb to that victim mentality. It does you zero good to say, this isn't fair, or why did I lose my job to cause this foreclosure, whatever. The fact is you're in this situation. So I think taking ownership of the situation and recognizing I am here and this is the situation I need to deal with is step number one. So facing reality, owning the situation. Not every circumstance is from our own doing. Some things are, some things aren't. So a lot of the guests I've had on the show have succumbed to health issues, and most likely that wasn't their own doing, right? So a lot of things happen to people it's not their fault. So if you're facing foreclosure or financial hardship, I think just acknowledging this is where I am, taking ownership of that situation, and not making excuses, not playing the victim card is critical. So, okay. And then step two, pointing to your strengths, because you do have positives, I'm sure, in your life. Who are the people who've overcome this before? What have they done to navigate this situation? What can I do? And ask for help, right? So we can get into specifics of how that can be done. But when I say take ownership, that doesn't mean you're all by yourself and you have to figure this out on your own and good luck. No, I'm saying take ownership because you need to, one of the ways you do take ownership is to ask for help and look to those around you who have either navigated this before or who can lend you a helping hand. So those are two things I think that have helped others navigate similar situations in the past.
So you said ask for help. Yeah. That's the reason why we create this podcast. So for homeowners who may be facing foreclosure or facing financial hardship, if you need help, we definitely have resources that we can point you to. We have resources here at theforeclosurefix.com. So please don't hesitate to shoot us a message, ask us a question. You can actually email us at help@theforeclosurefix.com, and we can point you in the right direction to resources and organizations who may be able to help you in your specific neighborhood or town or city and things like that. I want to segue and I want to think through the other side of it, because people, when they're going through difficult situations, have a tendency to only think about that negative situation, that they're not able to get to the other side and think about life on the better side. So if you get a bad diagnosis today and the doctor says you are going to have a rough journey ahead, right? It's hard for them to think about them living a fulfilled and fruitful life on the other side of that illness. When people get that foreclosure letter and they're thinking, oh, my house is going to be gone, it's hard for them to envision the next house they're going to get or them living a great life. What strategies, what tips, what things can people do when they do get themselves in those situations and are trying to look and be more abundant mindset or have a more of abundance mindset moving forward?
Yeah, and a few things that come to mind. And at first, I'll say it's easy for you and I to sit here on a podcast and talk about what people should do, right? So I acknowledge that. It's easy for us to talk about it, harder to implement. That said, taking a step back, I guess first is just, again, you will face challenges in life. No one gets through this life without challenges. So when those challenges come, you shouldn't be surprised. Again, easier said than done. I fall into the same trap. It's very difficult, in difficult situations to stay positive. But I think just knowing that this is a hardship that is presented to me, and it's not unexpected in a way. You don't know how exactly it's going to materialize, but this is expected in life. To me, that gives comfort, actually, because you shouldn't be expecting all rainbows and unicorns and butterflies for the rest of your life. Okay, now you can address this situation. Say, okay, what am I going to learn from this, and how is this making me stronger? I think number two is taking what I call the portfolio view or the long-term view. So again, easier said than done. I get it, but this is not the end of your story, right? And so you can point to other stories, and that's the reason for your podcast. That's the reason for my podcast, is so that the listener can see somebody else got through this situation and came out better on the other side. So for me, that's a way to remind you, this isn't the end, right? This is, other people have done this. This is only part of my story. So I think zooming out, and that would include looking at other stories. So zooming out, looking at your entire life, and this is just a difficult season that I'm going through. And during that time, examining others' stories to say, no, this is just one phase. That gives that big picture, long-term view perspective, and can really help in those hard times. So I think, one, knowing that these hardship is going to happen, and then two, understanding that this is just a season and this will pass. I think those are critical.
Your perspective is really, really helpful there, because as you were talking and you were saying, look at the big picture, the vision, or what I envisioned in my head, is like almost like a stock market ticker, for lack of a better term, or a chart, where, someone looks at a company, when they first started, and a successful company, and they look at their performance over time. And their performance over time is not like a straight line that's just going up in one direction. Typically, it's a line that has ups and downs, but the total trajectory is always trending up and to the right. And I think that
Absolutely.
if we're able to look at our lives like that overall we are trending in the right direction. We're going in the right place. But there's going to be highs and lows that we get to as we ascend the mountaintop. It helps us have a better perspective. Now, again, I agree with you. That's so much easier for me to say on this podcast in the comfort of my warm house, with my bow tie on, than it is to actually be in a situation where you're in the hospital bed. I had a situation earlier this year where I got to sit down with my cousin who was in the hospital dying of cancer. And
Wow.
and in that moment, there were so many different emotions and things like that I had.
Yeah.
But it was very easy for me to say, hey, everything is going to be okay. Keep fighting. You're doing the best thing. But, for him, as he lay there, given all his strength to breathe, it's a very different emotion, and it's a very different thing. And so we don't want to like trivialize it or make people feel like it's easy, but it is definitely looking at the arc and the highs and lows of life, knowing that more of your life will be better than it is bad.
And another little mindset shift that I picked up from a podcast guest, and I've been trying to implement it as best as possible, is simply asking the question, even if. So instead of asking the question, what if? So a lot of us get caught up in the what if this happens. 90% of that stuff never happens, and so you're spinning. What if this terrible thing happens? What if this goes wrong? And it never happens anyway. So you wasted your time, and your energy focusing on these and worrying about these things that never actually came to fruition. But again, even if those things happen, even if I lose my home to foreclosure, right? I'll do this, and this. I'll reach out to this family member, So I'm not saying foreclosure is fun. I'm not saying you should look forward to foreclosure or, a financial hardship. But even if, you'll still be okay, right? We went through some hard times with my son's health. You spoke about the, physical health challenges, and we've had some health challenges in my own household this year. And what that did for me is it put things in perspective, that if I have a deal goes bad in real estate, or, a business challenge, it's like, you know what, that's okay. So And so I think just kind of keeping things in perspective, taking the long-term view, realizing that even if this challenge hits me really hard, I'm still going to be okay, or I can do this, and this to mitigate the loss or navigate the situation. I think that's just that mental shift of asking the question, even if, can really alleviate some of this anxiety that tends to build up if we focus too much on what if this, what if that.
Your commentary on even if sparked a question, and given that this is a Veterans Day episode, speak a little bit to your mindset as a combat veteran of that even if when you're going to combat, right? You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
You talk about, health challenges, we talk about foreclosure, but when folks are risking their entire lives and you're going in combat with your fellow armed services members, talk about that even if mentality in that scenario a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, obviously the stakes are higher in combat than in most other, situations. If you lose a football game, who cares, right? So we would work through all kinds I think it goes back to training and reps and teamwork. So through training, basic training, I went through officer candidate school, and then you go through other training. And then prior to to a deployment, you typically have a mobilization where you're training with your fellow troops. And so you would work through all kinds of those scenarios. And so tons and tons of planning goes into military operations. And although, there's that Mike Tyson quote about everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. So, certainly the plan never goes to plan, right? The actual execution never actually goes to plan, right? But that said, that planning can really help you walk through and think through a lot of hypotheticals of even if this happens, then this happens. And so it's putting in those reps, and then you build that confidence and that comfortability with your teammates, and I guess kind of thinking through hypothetical scenarios of negative situations. And so, no, you don't know exactly how it's going to play out. But one, you're not the first person to ever go to combat. And so, and two, you have your teammates, and three, you've been through all this training. And so you that gives a lot of comfort so that you can work through those even if scenarios, as opposed to, sitting back and thinking, what if. And one other thing I'll mention is just, I think taking action and being proactive and owning the situation. It goes back to taking ownership of the situation is critical when it comes to thinking through those even ifs in the military. So again, and you can say that's the training is taking action, right? And then you feel like you've been there before if something does go south. But we would have all kinds of, I guess, if this happens, then this, and this, all kinds of procedures. And the details are absolutely critical in the military because, lives are on the line. So all of those factors go into supporting those even if scenarios, that even if approach to the military. And yeah, I mean, happy to talk more about, my experiences in the military. I was in Iraq from 2005 to 2006. We worked with the Iraqi army, plenty of challenges. It wasn't all smooth sailing. Thankfully, we all made it back alive. And, lots of life lessons from that deployment that I've certainly applied to the rest of my life.
When I hear you say that, I think about the spectrum that you put things on, and if foreclosure is a 3, losing your life is the ultimate 10, right? You know what I mean? And so I think sometimes we have to always back up and understand that a situation may be bad, but as long as we have breath in our lungs, as long as we can still breathe, as long as we can still move forward, we have so much more to give, so much more to offer. And I think that your perspective today and the advice that you're bringing our listeners is timely, but it's also very much needed, because half of the foreclosure battle is not the financial side. It's also the mental side and being able to do something. And so, Jamie,
Absolutely.
that brings me to my favorite part of the podcast, which is our bow tie round. which is when our listeners get to tie one on with our guest today, Jamie Bateman. And so the B in bow tie round stands for your best advice for somebody facing foreclosure. The O stands for one thing you are grateful for. And the W stands for your wildest or most interesting foreclosure related story. So, Jamie, what is your best advice for somebody facing foreclosure?
I would say it's twofold. One is take ownership of your situation. Don't ignore it. Too many borrowers that I've seen just want to bury their heads in the sand. It's easier, frankly, to ignore it, but own the situation. And with that, what comes next is communicate. Communicate with your lender, with the servicer. Communicate. Don't just try to avoid. So own it and communicate.
Awesome. What is one thing you are grateful for right now?
Yeah, I would say my health and the health of my family really come to mind. I forget the exact quote, but they talk about a man without money wants money, but then once a man without health has only one wish, right? So I butchered the quote, but the fact is, health is so much more important than $1 billion, right? So I like to make money. I like to, there's nothing wrong with making money, but compared to your health, it's nothing. So physical and mental health, I'm very thankful for.
I couldn't agree more. Going back to that story I talked about earlier, when I was able to go to the hospital with my cousin, I was talking with one of the nurses who worked in the same ward that my cousin was in, and she was like, a few months prior, she had taken care of a billionaire, and the billionaire said that he would give all his money away just to live one more day, right? And so your commentary is so true, that the money that we make a big deal out of is not as important as us, having great health, which we take for granted a lot of times.
Absolutely.
Your wildest or most interesting foreclosure related story?
Yeah, I've got being a non-performing note investor, meaning we buy defaulted mortgages. So I have several. One that comes to mind that I don't think I've ever spoken about on a podcast is one where we ended up having to foreclose. We actually did foreclose. It was in Michigan, and that said, we ended up unforeclosing. And yeah, I'd never done this before until this year. So, and this is where I'd say, like, borrowers, homeowners, own the situation and communicate, because most of the time, especially in this private note space, smaller note investor, they want to work with you. The lender wants to work with you. The investor wants to work with you. That's typically a better scenario for them. So unfortunately, in this situation, our borrower just was not communicative. She kind of just dropped off and I think she had lost her job but stopped communicating. So a lot of times for me is when I'm approaching a scenario like this, let's face it, one of the reasons you get into as a note investor, one of the appealing facets of this strategy of buying defaulted debt is that there's collateral. So the real estate is collateral. So one of your options is to foreclose. If you take that away from the lender, it's not as appealing, and they're just tying their hands. So as a lender, I will often initiate foreclosure simply to get the borrower back to the table, to speak, to communicate. It's almost like parenting, where it's a threat to your kids, hey, but really, I don't want to punish I want to have a conversation, and I want to come to a resolution. So in this case, the borrower just dropped off the face of the earth from a communication standpoint. She just stopped communicating, kind of buried her head in the sand, and kind of leaves the lender's hands tied. So we pursued foreclosure. It was a 6-month redemption period, so we had to wait a good bit and then executed the foreclosure. Well, come to find out that the HAF program, there were federal funds that were applied to essentially disperse to states for the states to execute this COVID-related relief program. I'm not sure if you've talked about that on your show at all, but HAF, some states may still have some of those funds available. So turns out in this case, the state had been wanting to help our borrower, our homeowner in this scenario, but there'd been a lack of communication across the board. And I think that involves the servicer as well. So I find out that from the Michigan half, from the program that they want to help. So I unforeclosed, and we actually reversed the foreclosure, deeded the property back to the borrower with the understanding that the state would reinstate her. And so we got, she received $25,000, which was the max, to reinstate her. We got most of that sent to us, and she got the property back. And she's since been making payments, mostly on time, which is fantastic. So I've got plenty of other stories, but that was a first for me, to actually foreclose and then unforeclose and deed the property back. Because again, I'm not in this to take the property. I've got rentals, but that's not the goal. That's not my goal. I'm here to work with borrowers. It's honestly more profitable in most scenarios for me to do that anyway. And I don't want to be kicking people out of their home. That's not the goal. But that borrower, you need to own the situation and you need to communicate. That's the only way you can come to a resolution.
Jamie, that's definitely the first time I have heard a story about a lender unforeclosing without like litigation or something crazy. You know what I mean? But that is that's wild. You hear some pretty wild stories in this world, in this business. Well, Jamie, we're so grateful for you coming by the podcast today. Please let our listeners know how they can track your journey, how they can listen to your podcast, buy your book, get in contact with you over at Labrador Lending. Share that information with them, please.
Thanks, DJ. I really appreciate the time. One thing I'll mention is, so my podcast is From Adversity to Abundance, and the website is adversitytoabundance.com, and that's the number 2, adversitytoabundance.com. You can buy the book there, and you can listen to the podcast. Since this is a veterans episode, special veterans episode, we've had several amazing veterans stories on my podcast. People who've honestly shouldn't have made it through, in their own words, shouldn't have made it out alive. People have had crazy combat situations where the rest of their life is essentially bonus time. And it's fascinating to talk to someone like that, where, they just see life differently. And I think when you hear from someone who's been through something like that, it can really, like you said earlier, DJ, we're not downplaying the difficulties of foreclosure or any kind of financial challenges, but these people almost, they've had near-death experiences. So a little financial adversity is not gonna, that's not the end of the world. So I think for your listener, they want to check out some of those military and veteran episodes. I'd highly recommend those. I have one that's actually not out yet, and I know this is going to be aired shortly. So I think it may be next week. Is one that's from it's called the Bipolar General, and he was a 2-star general, and has suffered from bipolar disorder and mental health challenges. So I just want to plug that because it is the veterans episode, and we've had some fantastic veterans on my podcast, From Adversity to Abundance. So definitely check that out. LabradorLending.com is my main website as far as real estate and note investing. So those are the 2 things that I'm appreciative that you're letting me plug here, DJ. So thanks again for the time.
No problem. And Foreclosure Fix family, I know this episode was maybe not as upbeat as our normal episodes, but sometimes we always want to bring awareness to things that are important. Your mental health is so important, and understanding that whatever you're going through, this too shall pass. As long as you have breath in your lungs, you will be okay. You will survive. And so with that, if the mission to help 1 million homeowners successfully navigate foreclosure resonates with you, please do us a favor, like, subscribe, share the podcast with someone who may benefit, or check us out at theforeclosurefix.com and share your questions with us. We're happy to answer them. With that, we love you. We thank you for listening. God bless you. See you soon. The views and opinions on this podcast are for informational purposes only and should not be construed as legal advice. If you have a specific legal question, we highly recommend you contact a qualified legal professional.